Hi all. In this video we're going to talk about a couple by now sort of infamous thought experiments in ethics, so that we have something to talk about on the discussion boards. This video will be relatively short. I had some bigger plans for it, but we need to get some content up on the site so we can start talking about ethics. So the thought experiments that we'll be talking about today are trolley problems. I'm going to talk a little bit about, in general, why we discuss thought experiments in ethics so frequently. Over the course of the semester, we'll see a number of these, and we might as well start today. So I'll talk a little bit about why we discuss thought experiments in general. I'll show off my drawing abilities on a computer screen. We'll see how that goes. I'll ask you a couple questions that you'll be able to answer in the discussion threads. And then I'll give you some quiz questions at the end of the video. So let's go ahead and start. So first, let's talk about why we discuss thought experiments, especially in philosophy in general, but especially in ethics. So first, we all come to the study of ethics with strong intuitions about right and wrong and what it means to be a good person. It's kind of fun to teach ethics for that reason. It's unlike teaching algebra or something like that, where you don't come with strong intuitions about the issues or some like weird metaphysics or discussion about what it means to know something. Your intuitions might not be as strong there. But when it comes to ethics, we all have really strong feelings that we come to the study of ethics with. So we discuss these thought experiments to give as sort of like intuition pumps to get us to recognize the feelings that we're already bringing to the table. But we do have to keep in mind, and this is something I'll talk about throughout the first couple weeks and probably throughout the entire course, that while we do discuss our initial sort of pre-theoretical feelings about a variety of cases and even some real-life examples in this course, we do want to keep in mind that ethics involves more than just our raw feelings. I'll talk a little bit about that after we have some time to discuss these issues, because it often comes out in discussion that ethics, although it involves how we feel about cases, sometimes theories are built on top of how we feel about cases. There's a bit more to it. The second reason we discuss thought experiments is the real world is often a very messy place. It's often difficult to draw any generalizable moral principles from complicated real-life moral scenarios. So we'll see this when we read chapter 1 in the textbook. It has some interesting real-life cases, and we'll see the discussion of those cases gets really complicated really quickly. And our discussion of these thought experiments, they're designed to sort of give us a simple scenario in which to discuss our intuitions and start discussing ethical arguments. So they can make the discussion flow a little bit better because it'll be a little bit more focused. We can sort of bracket out some of the complications in the real world and focus on the morally relevant features of a situation. And the last reason I'll talk about is discussing these thought experiments allows us, again, to abstract a little bit away from the real world and see how competing ethical principles stack up against one another. So we can create a scenario where these ethical principles are put in tension and see how we think about them before we start looking at any theories. And even after we start looking at some theories, we might come back and revise the way we think about these scenarios. So let's see how this drawing thing will go. So a blank canvas. So here is the first thought experiment we're going to be looking at. Oh, this is going great. All right, so those are trolley tracks, and that's a trolley. You can tell that the trolley is speeding down the tracks. It's actually not supposed to be floating above the track. It's supposed to be connected to the track. You can tell it's going fast because look at those lines coming out the backside of the trolley. Trolley speeding down the tracks. That's definitely not a bus. That is a trolley speeding down some tracks. And look, there's no driver. You can tell there's no driver because there's nothing in this window here. So no driver. This is a runaway trolley speeding down the tracks. It also has no passengers. You can tell because there's no passengers that you can see in the window. Ah, yes. So on the trolley track are 5 people, 5 beautifully drawn people. And one thing you will now know about this situation, if this trolley continues down this track, these 5 people will certainly die. And you can imagine that however you'd like. You can imagine that the 5 people are tied to the tracks by an evil philosopher like me to try to get you to think about your ethical intuitions. You can imagine that the trolley is elevated. So the track is elevated, so either the people will get hit by the trolley or they'll have to jump to their death. Or you can imagine that it's at the bottom of a very steep ravine such that the people can't climb out. But you know that this is true. If that trolley continues down this track, then these 5 people will certainly die. Perhaps, happily for these people, there's an alternate track that this trolley could go down. If the trolley goes down this alternate track, we'll call it track B. We'll call the initial track track A. So if the trolley goes down track B, then these 5 people will certainly live. Perhaps happily for these people, you're involved in this situation. This is you. That's what you look like. You walk upon this situation and you immediately see there's a runaway trolley. It's headed down the track. It's going to kill 5 people if it continues down track A, but you know if you pull that lever, you can divert the trolley from track A and have it head down track B instead. To make this decision a little bit more difficult for you, there's one person on track B, and he's in a similar situation as the people on track A. So whatever is true about the people on track A is also true about the person on track B. If the people on track A are tied to the track, so is person on track B. If it's elevated on A, it's elevated on B. If it's at the bottom of a steep ravine, the same is true for both tracks. And you know that this is true. If you pull that switch and the trolley is diverted down track B, then the person on track B will certainly die. The people on track A would certainly live. So I'm going to ask you a question about this scenario, but before I get to the question, let me clarify some things about this scenario, because I've asked this about to a number of classes, and I realize I have to get some important parts of this down for you guys. So first of all, the trolley the trolley stops moving after it hits either the 5 people or the 1 person. There's nothing interesting that happens off the page here. There's some versions of the trolley problem where those tracks loop around, or there are further consequences down the track, forget about those. You don't need to worry about them. Also, you don't know anything about any of the people on the track. They're just people to you. So whatever you think about people, these are just people on the track. You don't know any details about who they are or what they do. You know nothing. They're as distinct as these really poorly drawn stick figures are. So now I'm going to ask you a question about this scenario. And the question is this. Should you, in this scenario, pull the lever diverting the trolley from track A to track B? And I want to clear the ground a little bit here, so do some philosophical work, which means nitpicking this question to death. So what I want to do is talk about some questions that I could have asked you but didn't ask you. And in doing so, I hope to make this this word that we're going to be using throughout the course of this semester, this should, which I put in bold, make it clearer to you. So note that I did not ask, would you pull the lever? That's importantly distinct from should you pull the lever. There are a host of considerations that might be relevant to the question, would you pull the lever, that are not to should you pull the lever. So, for example, you might have a debilitating phobia of trolleys, and every time you see a trolley, you immediately run for the hills. That would be something that would be interesting to a psychologist. But not necessarily a philosopher, an ethicist, right? Here we're wondering about what you should do, not what you would do. If you do have a trolley phobia, you should probably talk to a psychologist. They'd be very interested in hashing out your case with you. But what you would do in this scenario, I'm not so concerned with. I'm interested in what you should do. Now, also, there's a further complication in that there's multiple senses, multiple definitions of this word should. So compare these two different sentences. You should brush your teeth, and you should not tell a lie. I'm making the claim that there are two distinct uses of the word should here. The first sense, when somebody tells you you should brush your teeth, essentially what they're telling you is it would be good for you to brush your teeth. It would be prudent for you to brush your teeth. In other words, it would be good for you to brush your teeth, especially if you want to keep your teeth healthy into old age. The second sense I want to distinguish from that first sense. So in the first sense, it's explicitly saying it will be good for you if you brush your teeth. The second sense is saying you should not tell a lie, and that I'm claiming is the explicitly moral sense, the moral definition of this word should. It is sometimes advantageous to people to tell lies, but this is saying you should not tell a lie. And the implication seems to be, even if it's beneficial to you, you should not tell a lie. In other words, it's not the right thing to do. So that's the sense in which I'm employing the word should here. It's the explicitly moral sense of the word should. In fact, let me just say that in our discussion on this question, we're going to be bracketing out what's good for you in this scenario entirely. So let's just imagine that if you decide to allow the trolley to continue down track A, or if you decide to pull the lever and have the trolley go down track B, either way, you will face no consequences whatsoever. Nobody will be holding you legally responsible for anything you've done here. So let's bracket that out of the equation, and hopefully that will also make the sense of the word should here, the moral sense, even clearer in our discussions. So ask yourself this question. What should you do in this scenario? Should you allow the trolley to continue down track A, in which case the 5 people on track A will certainly die? Or should you pull the lever, diverting the trolley to track B, in which case those 5 people will live and the 1 person will certainly die? That's one of the questions you can answer in the discussion board for today's class. All right, so hopefully you have had a chance to answer that question. Now, let's talk about another thought experiment here, related. Let me clean up our canvas really quickly. Really quickly. Not so quickly. All right, that'll have to do. No, 1 minute, bear with me. You can, of course, fast forward through this. Okay, there we go. All right, so the second scenario that I want us to consider is very similar to the first. Maybe importantly differently, maybe not importantly different. Here it is, and again, I'll go ahead and draw it out. So again, we have some train tracks. Again, we have a trolley, even worse drawn this time. Again, no driver. Again, no passengers. Speeding down the track. In this scenario, you are not, well, that's also another similarity. There are still the 5 people on the track, and if the trolley continues down its current course, these 5 people will certainly die. All those features are the same. The differences start here. Instead of being a bystander at the switch, in fact, we'll call the first scenario the bystander scenario. This is not, you are not a bystander at a switch in this scenario. In this scenario, you are standing on top of a bridge, and you see the trolley speeding down the track. You see that it's going to kill these 5 people if it continues down the track. You have an additional feature than you probably have in real life. In this thought experiment, you are the world's greatest trolley engineer. You know everything about every model of trolley, and you know everything about this specific model of trolley. One thing you know about this model of trolley is it has a very powerful braking system, emergency braking system, where if it hits something of sufficient weight, then it will hit that thing with its full force, but it will stop dead in its tracks. So you see this impending catastrophe, so you look around for something of sufficient weight that you can put in front of that trolley to stop the trolley from hitting those 5 people. You are not of sufficient weight. You're mostly one-dimensional, except for your head. You're certainly don't have enough mass to stop this trolley, and those 5 people are not going to be even combined enough mass to stop this trolley. The trolley's going to continue and plow right through these 5 people if you can't find something to put in front of it. So you look around for something of sufficient weight. Leaning over a very rickety railing is a very large man. I would be much more PC about this, but in the literature, this is called the fat man trolley problem. We'll just go with the with that and this. You see a very fat man leaning over a very rickety railing. You immediately see, being the world's greatest trolley engineer, that this man would be of sufficient weight, and all you would have to do to get him onto the tracks is give him just a little nudge. So a difference about this world to our world is the consequences that will result from your actions with 100% certainty. So that's part of the messiness of the real world that we're going to bracket out of these thought experiments so that we can talk about the ethical principles without some of that messiness. We'll get to plenty real life scenarios, but for this, we'll bracket that out. In this scenario, if you give that man just a little push, he'll crash through the rickety railing, he'll fall down to the tracks, the trolley will hit him with full force, he'll certainly die, but the trolley will stop dead in its tracks and these 5 people will not die. If you don't do that, if you don't give this guy a nudge, those 5 people will certainly die. And furthermore, some additional things. That if you don't give this fat man a nudge, then he will live a long, healthy life, exactly as long and healthy as these 5 stick figures on the track would live if you decide to push him. So don't take his weight to be any indication that he's unhealthy. Furthermore, it's a glandular issue. It has nothing to do with his choices in life. I say these things because from experience. He's just take him, except for his mass, to be just as the other people. You don't know anything else about him except for he has the mass sufficient to stop the trolley from speeding down the tracks. You don't have time to ask him what he wants in this scenario. You only have time to either push or do not push. And really, those are the only 2 options I'm going to give you. So the question I'm going to ask you about this scenario is this. Should you push the fat man in the what's come to be called the fat man trolley scenario? So should you push the fat man, causing if you push him, that will result in his death, but the 5 people would live? Or should you not push him, that will result in the 5 people dying and the fat man living? So that's the other question that I'm going to ask you to discuss on the discussion board. So I'll ask you to pick one of these scenarios and give your answer and defend your answer in under 200 words. You'll also have to respond to somebody else, what they say about these trolley problems. Please be nice to each other, just as if we were in front of each other. These trolley discussions about these hypothetical trolley problems, surprisingly, can get very heated. Let's have good online etiquette and be welcoming to our fellow students and civil in our discussions about these problems. You'll be surprised hopefully, how passionate people get about these. All right, so then I'm going to end this video with a couple of quiz questions. So after you watch this video, so I'm going to give you these quiz questions. Make sure you write down what your answer is for these, because I'll just ask you when you open the Canvas quiz, what's the answer to quiz question number 1, and you'll put A, B, or C. So I won't give you the question. I won't give you the answers on Canvas, so make sure you're writing your answer down right now. And if you're unclear about what the answer is, you can, of course, rewind the video to find the relevant section. So the first quiz question will be this. Which of the following is not a reason why ethicists discuss thought experiments? So not a reason. Is the answer A, they provide us with simpler scenarios for enhanced focus on ethical principles? Or B, they have clear right and wrong answers? Or C, they help us recognize our own intuitions, our own feelings that we're bringing to ethical discussions. So which is not a reason that ethicists discuss thought experiments? A, B, or C? And quiz question number 2, which of the following sentences uses the word should in the explicitly moral sense of the word? A, you should not tell a lie. B, you should brush your teeth. Or C, you should work on your sleep hygiene. Which of those sentences uses the word should in the moral sense of the word? So that will be the second quiz question, and that brings us to the end of our first content video for the class. Hopefully this will give us a lot to discuss on the discussion boards. I'm looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say, and hopefully we can get a lively discussion going about this before we get into some of the messy real-world problems. I'll talk about some of the conclusions we can draw from our discussion of these cases. If I don't get to them on the discussion board, then maybe I'll make another video about it or talk about them. Chapter 1 will cover some of the same ground with the real-life cases to consider. So we'll talk about what we can draw from our discussion of these cases at a future date. Just for now, hopefully we have fun discussing them, and I look forward to hearing what you have to say. So do the quiz for this section. There's going to be another video posted. That other video is about the parts of arguments, how to identify the parts of an argument. So in that video, I'll refer to a text that we won't be using. Don't let that throw you. Finding the parts of arguments will be important for this class, as it is for the class for which I made that video. So take the quiz on this, watch the next video on the parts of arguments, and take the quiz for that too, and then let's get a discussion going on these trolley problems. All right, thank you so much for watching. I look forward to hearing what you have to say.